Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to AI 2030 show. My name is Xiaochen Zhang, the CEO of FinTech for Good, and also the Executive Director of AI 2030, your host of today. Today we have a special guest, and before we start the deep dive, and let me just invite Satya to just introduce yourself.
Thanks for having me. I am Satya. I'm a third-year PhD student at Harvard, computer science. I work on problems related to responsible AI, and have worked in industry before for 3 years on similar problems in responsible AI, and have been continuing in that area for my PhD as well. And I have basically published in some of the major journals, conferences in the area of machine learning and AI on such problems.
Yeah, and you are, not just 100% go from school to school, and then before you start your PhD, you worked, for different companies and with technical job and all that. So what drive you to go back to school, and why, when you're back to school and then your focus is around responsible AI or ethical AI?
Right. I think like one of my major motivations problems when I was at Amazon, where we were working on responsible AI problems for like Alexa and similar products. And the thing that motivated me to come back to academia was to basically more specifically, instead being just part of the job, but rather wanted to spend some time thinking deeply about these problems, because I felt like it requires more rigorous thinking to get to the solution of these problems, because these are very hard problems that we are currently seeing, even with the growing AI LLM space that we are looking at. So I just wanted to basically get back and give some dedicated time studying these problems in more depth. And yeah, it's an industry, because of the pace of the projects and the workflow, it sometimes becomes a little challenging to spend a dedicated amount of time for a problem. So academia is a great way to take a little time off from that pace and sit through and dive deep into the problems and spend more time thinking about them. So yeah, that was the motivation.
Yeah, and definitely that totally makes sense. As everyone just this it's a very complex topic to address. And after you worked on this topic for a few years, and then you also now already researched full time on this for some time. And what's your core findings, or what are the core areas that you devote most of your time, and have you got something out of that yet?
Yes. So my specific research is on essentially explaining how these models work. So one of the key things that has happened, or a problem that we are still facing, is that these models are really complex, and they are operating at a scale, at a complexity that we are not able to understand it clearly. Like there's people who build these models. What we are building is essentially the training process, not really what the model has essentially learned. So there is a lot of questions that are open about explaining and understanding how these models think when they make a prediction. And the challenge is to essentially get far into their decision-making process, so that we can understand if it makes a flawed decision, we can understand what went wrong and we can go back and fix it. So a simple example could be that you build a software system, and if there's a bug, a software engineer goes back, puts up a test case, fixes the problem, and the system then starts to work again. We would want some level of that in machine learning modeling as well, where we would want that if the model has issues, we go back, we fix the specific thing, and it never happens. So there should be a clear solution to a problem with these machine learning models, but we currently don't have anything as concrete and strong as that. And there are heuristics and solutions, workarounds, but there is yet to understand this mechanism well and get to the solution of these problems. So that has been like my work, my findings. So I started off. So when I was working, I had been working with a lot of these explanation tools. So there are a lot of these explanation methods that help you get explanations to a prediction made by a machine learning model. And these explanation tools have been used, are being used in a lot of financial companies and a lot of tech companies as well. One of the things that I wanted to try was that why are they still not, still giving me the right picture of the model? Because there's like a lot of noise in it. They are not very perfect. So the idea was to drill down into its weaknesses. And as a practitioner of these methods, using them when I was in the industry, I used to get really frustrated by the different explanation I used to get from these different methods. So my first research, which is about concretizing this problem and kind of like defining this problem, was to understand why there is such a difference and what is the magnitude of this difference of explanations that we are getting from different tools. So that is what we call as the disagreement problem, which was my first paper when I started my PhD. And the findings was that, like major percentage of people who use these tools find this problem to be quite significant in their decision-making process. So they basically rely on explanation methods to make some really complicated decisions, and they find different explanations for different predictions that the model is making, and they're not able to come to the conclusion as to why the model made a particular decision. So it's not helping them understand the model well. There's an unreliability issue there. So that's what we studied and presented as a problem. Still a continued problem, but it required, like, we basically found out there that 80% of people, around about 80% of the people, find this challenge of disagreement, and that leads to them not being able to be very convinced about an explanation or the understanding of the model. So that was part of that paper, and we have tried to follow that up with OpenXAI, which is like a way to measure the quality of explanation, which is another challenge because it's not very easy to evaluate the explanation that we get for a machine learning model. And what we proposed in that OpenXAI paper, which is like a benchmark, where we proposed and we basically collated a ton of different metrics out there. And just to give practitioners or people who are using these explanation methods a clear picture of which method or which explanation is good, we basically give them like a dashboard of the performance of an explanation on different metrics. These metrics are out there, but they are not then they're not like studied at one place. And one set of group of people like to believe on one metric, the other believes on the other metric. But the point of that framework was to bring together all at once, all at one place, and to get a very clear picture as to which explanation method does well on what part and which doesn't. So you can make a call as to which one to rely on when you are analyzing a model or thinking to explain a prediction by a model.
Yeah, that's just dive a little bit deep into the first, the disagreement problem, where that's, from your 87% is a pretty significant number. And
about 80.
Sorry?
Yeah, it's about like 80, I would go. Like
80.
Like there are different buckets that are placed in, but yeah, a big majority of them are facing this problem.
And have you just also from this discover process, found out that with such a big portion of disagreements, how can they just move on? And then they use the risk management approach to say, we just take it as a risk, or we just ignore it as make an informed decision that we ignore because we don't know, we ignore that. How can they move forward then?
Yeah, this was one of the questions we tried to answer, or like find out the answers from practitioners who are using these methods. And That was the thing that we were surprised as well, that a majority of the participants who did that survey showed that they go with random instincts when they face disagreement. So essentially, there's no great way of going with the right explanation. So that's where we came up with metrics that like one way to choose or kind of like disambiguate this issue with explanations is to look at the performance of those explanations and how do they really do it. Like, for example, when we have to choose between two machine learning models, we look at their accuracy or whichever metric that is essential to complete a task. And similarly, one of the ways, I mean, there are definitely different ways, or one of the ways is to quantitatively evaluate the explanations generated by these methods. And if you want the explanation to be stable, for example, like stability is one of the popular metrics. Then the idea is that you go with the explanation which has the best stability, like it doesn't have any unreliability issues, or you go with, let's say, an explanation that is more faithful, or like something that it really truly explains the model. So one approach is like metric based approach. There is pros and cons to that as well. Like the con is that um, it is very hard to concretely quantitatively measure the quality of an explanation, because you don't have ground truth. There's no way, unlike accuracy where you always have human labels, we normally don't have such human labels for explanations behind a model prediction. So it's hard, but there are like proxies to measure it. There are approximations of these of the the variety of evaluation metrics that are out there. The pro is that you get some level of method rather than just being random or having no principled approach to selecting the best explanation. You have some approach, and if you go wrong, you can track back and look where things went wrong, which is still better than just randomly picking explanation that fits your instinct or something. So that's one way. The other way is to basically evaluate the uncertainty of these explanations. Like you mentioned, the risk, which is that if there is uncertainty as to how accurate a particular explanation is, one way to is to quantify that uncertainty and have it out like up front that, hey, this explanation is out there, but it has pretty high uncertainty, and we may not want to completely rely on it, or we want to take it lightly rather than focusing too much on it. So that's another way. And it also has its pros and cons. Pros being that you're being transparent that this is not useful, or there are risks to it. You're trying to quantify that risk or hedge that risk that you're going to be facing with relying on that explanation. But the con is that you don't there is no way out of it. Like if there is a risk, it's very hard to minimize that. Like there are issues regarding that as well, because it is just what it is. It's like a drawback of the explanation method, and there are very little things that you can do after. So there's a cap there as well. So yeah, these two would be the approaches that I would think to kind of work around this problem.
Yeah, very interesting. And my academic curiosity of the next question will be different. I don't think you will cover that, but in my mind is that now if you are a regulator, the models are used in the regulated industry, and if 80% of them cannot really explain to you, and how can you just make them compliant? But I think that may not be the part of your research. But I would, I think that could be something very interesting to me. Yeah.
Yeah, that is the goal. That is the North Star, that we would want to explain all models. Like the thing that we expect is that these machine learning models, AI models, whichever term you want to use, they're basically, we want them to be transparent, that we can look into the issues if there are issues, like the way we do it for like a software system,
Right.
and to be clear with it that if it has gone wrong, we should be able to fix it. As simple as the way we do it in software systems, which now have matured to a point that the bug fixing is better. So yeah, that's the North Star. Currently, like you're right, that there is majority of the models out there, they are way too complex. And at the moment we only have heuristics or like, guesses as to what they are really doing. But yeah, that, I would love to achieve that during my PhD. That's kind of like the the goal, and yeah, we're working on.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, we spend some time on the disagreement problem, and you also mentioned about the algorithmic fairness. And can you explain to us of this concept?
Yes. So a simple example is that if I'm from originally from India, and if I am using a voice assistant to book a flight ticket, then I should be able to do that as comfortably as someone who is in the US or who is from the US or speaks a different language. So the idea is that we want to make these models serve everyone, without any bias, inherent in them. And the idea is to make these as useful to everyone. There's just one definition. I mean, fairness has multiple definitions, but this is from a tech perspective, this is one of the definitions that to work on. And my work has like the couple of papers that I have written on evaluating fairness. Like the big problem here is to concretely evaluate fairness. And one of the papers I wrote when I was working for a company was to take all of these LLMs that are out there, and evaluate how much of bias exists in them. And we basically proposed 5 different metrics, and they were focused on gender bias. So they were trying to evaluate how does text completion, which is one of the tasks that the language models are trained on, which is to if you give a prompt, they fill up the rest, or like they do a text completion. So we were evaluating the gender bias that these models can possess when they are completing a sentence. And the sentence could be something about an occupation. So if it's about nurse, we don't want the language model to think that this is always about a woman. This is about like male as much as about women, and it should not have any bias in its decision making. So that was the goal, or like the evaluation was the goal of my work. And I mostly work on evaluations because currently we are at a stage where there is yet to be any consensus on like what is the best way to evaluate fairness, because as you can think, like different people have different ways to define it. It's a very subjective, or like not a very general concept. The community is still in the process of like getting all those feedbacks from different people who are outside of tech as well, and kind of like define a good well accepted metric, and that has been my research on. So that was one way to defining, I guess,
That's exactly as what you said. Come back to the research space where that's bring the industry questions here and spend time to just dive deep. It's not that you immediately can find a solution for everything, but that thinking process, to just ask the right question, I think itself is really interesting. Where that's one. You already mentioned a little bit about OpenX AI. I think that's part of the solutioning process. After you discuss about the disagreement problem, and then where that research can contributing to the understanding, contributing problem solving. And can you just share a little bit more about the OpenX AI projects? And you already talked a little bit about it. Yeah.
Yeah. The idea or the motivation of that problem, of that paper, was to give a solution to the disagreement problem, essentially, which is that currently we have a bunch of metrics to evaluate explanations, but the community, based on our work and our findings in the disagreement problem paper, we found out that most people are not aware of a lot of these metrics, and they don't have enough understanding of how these metrics work or what these metrics really do. So the idea was to basically propose, a platform where people can evaluate the quality of an explanation. And what we did essentially there was we basically collated all these different metrics that are out there that evaluate different aspects of an explanation, and we basically put all of that together in one place, and we experimented and showed that this dashboard or this platform can give you pretty much all sort of evaluation of all sort of aspects of an explanation to kind of judge which explanation you want to rely on. Because ultimately, the idea is that if there is a disagreement, a practitioner would like to know, one, why is there a disagreement? Second, what's the way out? Sometimes they just want to know the latter, like what's the next steps here? Because I don't know how to make a call from these not very certain explanations. And to mitigate that confusion, the idea was to have a benchmark, a platform where people can do an apple-to-apple comparison with the different methods that are out there, and kind of see which explanation method or which explanation is the way to go for and is more reliable. So we were basically, it's a set of metric. It provides you a dashboard where you can evaluate. It's all open source, so you can evaluate any of the method. We have given all the code for onboarding, pretty much the whole pipeline to come up with whatever explanation you have, and just test it over the test bed, and you will get like some comprehensive set of evaluations of the quality of that explanation. And hopefully that will help people kind of make a better call, or like at least a more principled or structured call, rather than going by guesses or personal biases or
Yeah,
like
so for the open XAI platform, who are your target audience? Are they researchers or policymakers or technical staff in a company, or is all business decision maker, and what kind of skill set or technical knowledge they should have before they decide whether this tool is useful for them or not?
Right. So we have made it, we have the target audience there is anybody who uses an explanation method, a post hoc explanation method, which is essentially methods that take a trained machine learning model and try to understand what the model thought as important in making a decision. And when I say considers what is important, I mean what was the thing that it considered important as a feature from the input to make a model prediction. So essentially, anybody who uses a machine learning model in any space, we have given like the experiments that we did were on very diverse data sets. So it was from healthcare, finance, criminal justice. So we use like Compass data. So it has experiment across all these different data sets. And the idea was that, people working from all these different sectors trying to explain the decision made by a machine learning model would be able to benefit from this platform and get to evaluate the explanations that they have. This is also applicable to researchers like who are building new explanation methods. They can try it, like evaluate their method against some of the existing ones. So that gives them one, one-stop shop, kind of like a benchmark to do that, rather than looking into and implementing all these different metrics that are fragmented and not there at one place. So so yeah, it's a pretty diverse community that we tried to cover in that in the utility of that benchmark.
Got it. And again, still stay for the open XAI. And is this more as open access platform where that you make access for the public, or is when you just come up with it, it's also open source? So in general, I'd like to have your comment on how important it is open source to responsible AI in general.
I feel it's quite essential because responsible AI, AI safety, these are things that are very essential to everyone who is going to be using AI in their, in their daily use cases. And what open source brings is transparency. It brings people, a lot of people, to look at an evaluation or look at a method and try to, question it, try to think about it, find flaws in it, or bring in front like some of the issues that are still unsolved. So it brings a lot of participation. It brings a lot of new ideas, new brains from all different sides of the world, because safety is safety one, not just people who are in tech or in a particular sector, but this is for a wide majority, because the way AI is growing, ChatGPT is one example where everybody who doesn't, from kids to elderly, everybody is using it and finding it useful. And this becomes an important thing for everyone. It's a problem for everyone rather than a particular sector. So open source brings it to the public. It helps people look at the details and question it, and like see what was done according to the expectation. It brings a lot of suggestions. I have during my undergrad, I used to do a lot of open source contributions, and I always admired the community being very passionate about bringing impactful work. And it's more important than ever to have more open source models and discussions about AI specifically.
Thank you. Yeah, so now that you have different research papers, you have also the platforms, and then you will continue to advance in both sides. And for business and the companies, and also including the government or public sector, and if who are eager to adopt AI responsibly or just support responsible AI adoption, how can they leverage and apply your research findings and methodologies?
Yeah, I think it's a growing process. I think there is, given the recent surge in the models, I would, if I were to think about this problem as to implementing them or bringing them to use, I would think on both sides. I would, if I'm designing an AI model for an industry use case, I would not just think of its capability of performing the particular task, a particular business use case, but also think of the flip side of its disadvantages. If we do it too much, are we harming the customers, or in any sense is there a safety concern? So I think safety is now an important thinking, or an important component to think about as we are building AI models for production cases. And yeah, and it is a growing field at the moment. There is a lot of things that are developing at the safety side. There are a lot of people. There's a big community that is working really hard on making these AI models safer, measuring their safety, making it public, making people aware of the potential risks. And that same goes with any company or any organization using these models for their use cases, which is to think deep in what are the potential cases that this may be, and one of the best ways is to keep following the developments, because this is, as I said, this is like a very growing field, and lots of things are changing, as researchers as well are in some sense have been surprised by the capabilities of these models. And we are also thinking and are quite at early stages on the potential risks that it has. And I think at this point, the best we, as a community, that we can do is communicate that and make sure that the person understands these risks before it's going into it, or like using it, or putting it into a scaled production system. So
yeah, in the future, and in the future, when I'm thinking about what would be the best AI responsible AI solution, which just are also safe, is the AI itself, because Gen AI is generative, right? Where that if there is any risk or exposure or vulnerability, where that's the model itself can just send alert to the users. And that way, does that kind of thinking help?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting thought. I think um like I mentioned in the beginning as well, that it is important for us to get some control over how these models work before we can rely on their signals of safety,
Mhm.
because that may be unreliable as well, because at the moment we don't really know if what it's saying is reliable. Like it already, we have seen like with LLMs, there is issues with misinformation, sycophancy, and many things that have come open where you cannot really rely on its reasoning or its answers. So until we ground that and we are 100% sure that this is how it's working and this is how we can fix the some of these problems, I'm not entirely sure if we would want to rely on its own signals, because you never know, like that they could be totally wrong. And the community at this moment is still at the stage where we are evaluating
Mhm.
how much um, you know how big of this unreliability is a problem. Like we have seen it, and that has been a concern, and we have some people have showed that this is is a pretty serious problem, that you cannot rely on factual information stuff, for example. And many of the platforms that have put out their language models have in fact added this warning as well, to not rely on these these decisions that the model is making. So yeah, there's a lot to understand about the model before we can really use them as the safety signal. At the moment, like the best approach would be to first get to the bottom of how these models work. What are the different ways to, if it is working unexpectedly, or if there's like flaws in them, then what is the next steps in fixing those, and getting more control, I guess, like around the functioning of these models.
Yeah, I guess
But
what you
yeah.
said is there is a sequencing problem here, right? And then firstly, from researchers or practitioners that find out as a humans, first find out how that's work, and then what are the risk, what are the unsafe components, and then design that back. But if now that's even humans don't understand problem well, and then say, hey, we give the task to the machine, and then if we rely on the machine, and then we probably just go totally to a wrong direction. Yeah.
Yeah.
And another
Yeah,
question.
reliability. Yeah.
Go on.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead. Oh, yeah, no, I was just mentioning that, underlying the point that yeah, reliability is something of a concern. And while they are doing great on some of the benchmark tasks, test sets, things like that exist, um we definitely cannot rely on them to make decision calls, especially related to safety, because we don't really understand how they think about safety, and how these were trained, and how these were built, thinking about from a safety perspective. So yeah, that's a
Yeah.
big problem.
Yeah. Following that, and I'd like to just get your input regarding the responsible AI frameworks, where that's we see academic framework, we see industry framework, we see the government framework, we also see international organization framework. So many out there. So for you as a researcher, and which one or ones are more prominent, and for you, what are key pillars of framework, and how people should, work with the framework.
Yeah, I think with all the things, like everybody is thinking about it, which is a positive. I think there should be more discussions, and the discussion should be from all different angles, like thinking from it from a safety, from utility. It's good to have more discussion. I think it's good that many people are thinking about it, and there are a lot of discussions about safety as well. So that is a positive. And I think given that it's such a new developing technology, it does come with, many different frameworks, which is good. Like there should be many different ideas that should be put on the table, and it is going to be a little, might seem chaotic in the beginning, but I'm optimistic that going down the line, we will, there will be more clarity about understanding these models, how they work, how to control in some sense, in their flaws, if there are, as we have already seen some. So yeah, the approach is like, I don't think there's a great answer to it, but I think more discussions is important, and discussions not just from the technical side of it, but also from the non-technical, which is people who are using it, being the daily customer. Almost, everyone, like kids are using a ton of these ChatGPT models, things like that. So everybody who has access to this model, it is important to get as much of their feedback, understanding of what they feel unsafe, because we can only think safety is such a personal issue, or like it's such an issue that you cannot really be exhaustive until you really go out there and get all the feedbacks, and you cannot only rely on people who are building it to give safety guardrails, but it requires more discussion. So my approach would be to bring different people together, like who are using it or being impacted by it, and get opinions, like get their thoughts, get them into the decision process of what they find as unsafe, and that would really help the people who are building it to incorporate their feedbacks, and hopefully we'll get to a consent on safety, and particularly the other aspects.
Yeah, what your comment definitely reminded me of a lot of conversation I had with different folks, where that, if you're a father or mother, or if you're single, if you are, you belong to a minority group who have some minority identity, or if you have, certain use case where that's, those kind of identity are important, where that's naturally that feedback, immediately that's, that bad experience always stay. And then I got a lot of those feedback from folks that's, focusing on one or two identities, where that's, they definitely using of AI, get them burned, or then they are the subject to the unfair treatment because of AI and all that. It's also related to certain identity this individual has, and I think bring all that back, and will be very important for the builder, and understand that you're not building for a like economic man who is ideal type there. You're building for real people who really have multiple identities. All identity really need to be celebrated, not to just be punished, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like the in some sense, relying on one section, like people who are building these models, um, these are just one section of people, and they won't be able to come up with, it's not very practical to assume that they would know all sets of safety concerns and everything. The idea is to have like a feedback mechanism where, if I find something unsafe, we should be able to communicate that, and same goes with you or anybody who is using these models, who, if they find something unsafe, they go ahead and communicate, and that feedback, I think, is required at the moment for sure, because currently we don't understand how these models clearly work, and getting that feedback from people will help in at least like creating some sort of guardrails on a particular use case, so that we know that, okay, for this use case there's a safety concern, and it requires fix and things like that. So yeah, having that communication slash, I would say, connection with people using it, is using these models, is quite essential in getting to also know these models and understand its risks early, before it goes out of hand and we don't really know how to fix some of these things. And so yeah, I would my word would be to have more discussion. And it's great to see like many people are putting up their thoughts, governments, institutions. So it will go through a lot of these iterations of discussions before I think we will have something very, very clear. It's as unclear to me as I think anybody who's working on it. So it's or using it. So we are all trying to understand these models, trying to get to make sure that there are enough ways to think about using and wielding these capabilities.
Yeah, and it's really great conversation. My last question, yeah, what's on the horizon for you, and what future projects or areas of research are the most exciting for you?
Yeah, I have been, I have been around explaining machine learning models for some time, and this problem is now even more important with the rise of larger models. Now we have, models of really, unbelievable sizes that we are using, in form of ChatGPT or some other language model. So this research, this problem is now even more important. So I'm more enthusiastic and excited about this problem and continuing to work on this. Yeah, so the idea is to essentially understand these models and then bring about the reasons why they are unsafe, measuring their safety more clearly, and hopefully contribute to getting these models to work in in a space where people can rely on them rather than being completely unaware or uncertain about these models and the risks. So in short term, like the idea is to study these safety concerns and measure them and bring insights about what are the things that it's unsafe, safe, what is the use case where they fail and requires more attention, study, and so yeah, lots of problems basically
Absolutely.
around understanding.
And I don't know whether you pay attention to the White House new executive order, and all what we discussed there, and especially the relationship between the explainability with the safety side, and which from the executive order, and many agencies will be tasked to just really working on those issues. And it's very clear those issues, as what you said, that's yet to be answered and need to be answered. And I think those two are really important, where that's you're onto something really big and important.
Yeah, I hope to contribute as much, and yeah, I'm optimistic that there will be a lot of growth as there's so much interest, and whenever there is a diverse set of people who work towards a common goal, things do happen, and yeah, I'm excited how the next few years would look like with these models.
Definitely, we'll invite you back, as a AI 2030 fellow, and we are just trying to bring the right message, helping our community to understand all those issues what we discussed, and also build their own expertise or build their own understanding, and how to drive responsible AI in their organization, or also to just make a positive impact to the society. And you're part of that movement, and thank you for your contribution already by sharing your expertise here. And I hope that others have enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. And thank you again, and looking forward to having you back for my future AI 2030 show.
Thank you for having me. It was great chatting with you. Thank you.
Thank you.